Here.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma.
Present.
David Miller.
Here.
Stacy Oliveris.
Doesn't approve she appear that she's back yet.
Okay, I show her in the meeting. Okay, Jason Perez.
Here.
Ramon Rubalcaba.
Doesn't look like he's here yet either.
Okay, Madam Chair, I have all but Stacy checking in and Ramon.
Here comes Stacy. I saw her. There she is.
Stacy? And Ramon Rubalcaba.
I'm still not seeing him. Okay. Well, it looks like we have a quorum. I'm going to move on to item number 2, approval of the September 15th meeting agenda. And I need a motion for that.
Move it.
Moved.
It was moved by Mr. Jones, and it sounds like seconded by Mr. Miller. And we need to take a roll call vote to pass it. So, Ms. Hopper.
Henry Jones?
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma.
I didn't hear you, Frank.
Oh, yes.
David Miller?
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris?
Aye.
Jason Perez?
Aye.
Ramon Rubalcaba?
I still don't see him.
Okay, Madam Chair, I have all ayes with no vote from Ramon Rubalcaba, with Henry Jones making the motion and David Miller seconding it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hopper. With that, we'll move on to the executive report.
Thanks, Chair. Everyone good on sound? Michael Cohen with the CalPERS Financial Office. I just wanted to circle back to 2 items I highlighted in April for you. One is the electronic payments program that we had started up in late March. When we met in April, we just had a few $100,000 worth of comments, of payments so far. And now I'm happy to report that we have over $4 million in collections to date. So it was really a well-timed project that you guys approved last year that's saving the organization money and improving our members' ability to make payments. And so that was really well-timed. And then the second note I would make is right after the July offsite, we held our second employer webinar. That was to walk all of our member employers through the impact of the final investment returns that you went through yesterday, 4.7%. While obviously they remain concerned about the rising costs, it certainly was much better news than our earlier webinar when we were sort of sitting at a negative 4 to 5% look back in the early days of the pandemic. So with those 2 notes, I'll turn it back to you, Chair, and we can work through the agenda.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Our next item is the action consent items. I need a motion.
Move.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so Mr. Perez made the motion. I've got Ms. Oliveris seconding the motion. All those in favor, and we need a roll call vote. Ms. Hopper. Pam? Are we having a little trouble with
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't unmute myself.
That's okay.
Okay, this is for items 4A and 4B. Henry Jones.
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma.
Yes.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava.
Aye.
Madam Chair, I have Jason Perez making the motion, Stacy Oliveris seconding it.
And the motion carries. All right, so we will carry on then to information consent items. Having received no request to remove anything, we will go on to item 6, agenda item A. Mr. Cohen.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Scott Tarando, our Chief Actuary. This item deals with adopting school and state rates, which you'll recall you did in the spring, but there were some changes based on the state budget that require a readoption of those rates. So let me turn it over to Scott Tarando.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Scott Tarando from the Actuarial Office. This item seeks the adoption of the revised contribution rates for both the state plans and the schools pool for the period starting July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. If you remember, back in April, the board did approve rates for these plans, but subsequent to that event, the state came back and they made some revisions on how they wanted the additional $3.4 billion contribution that they had made earlier. They made some adjustments on how they wanted that handled. In addition, there were some adjustments that to some employer and employee contribution rates as well. Based on these changes, we had to make adjustments for the final rates. So we're here today seeking your approval of these rates, and at this point, I'll pass it along to Kurt Snyder, who will step through all the details and provide you with that information.
Thank you, Scott, members of the board. And that was a very good, quick summary, but I want to go through a little bit of background to make sure we understand what is going on here today. So let me review a little bit the normal process for implementing employer contribution rate changes for the state plans and the schools pool. If this were a normal year, the initial results for the June 30, 2019 valuation would have been presented to the board in April of 2020, and the employer rates for the 2020-21 fiscal year would be approved by the board. Now, for the state plans, those rates become part of the State Budget Act, and the legislature appropriates the required funds. CalPERS sends out a circular letter to state agencies so that the new rate can be implemented by July 1st, 2020, 2 months ago. The June 30, 2019 valuation is actually finalized later in the summer. The same exact schedule applies to the school employers. They're done in tandem with the state rates. And the other piece of background that's important to understand here is that in July 2019, the state contributed $2.5 billion to 4 of the state plans and $904 million to the schools pool as advance payments towards the unfunded liabilities. So these payments represent money that CalPERS would eventually require the employers to contribute, but the employer in this case was contributing them sooner than CalPERS required. And the reason they do that is because they then anticipate in future years to be able to save tax dollars. Now, when an employer, no matter how big or small they are, when they make advance payments toward the UAL, the actuarial office works with the employer to determine how those payments will impact future contribution requirements. Because remember, we have this complex schedule of future UAL payments that stretches out for decades. And when we finalize the valuation and set the contribution rates, we need to first determine which future payments are being satisfied with the advance payment. And at the time the payment was made, remember this is the summer of 2019, the state was projecting budget surpluses in the short term, and they wanted long-term savings. So these funds were applied to future UAL payments in such a way that the contribution requirements would be slightly lower for many years. We're talking about up to 28 years. And in April of this year, when I presented the 2019 valuation results to the board, the additional payments were reflected reflected this long-term savings strategy. Can we go forward a couple slides? Now, as everyone knows, earlier this year, the COVID-19 pandemic caused a severe economic slowdown, and a state which had been projecting budget surpluses was suddenly projecting budget deficits. After the board approved the employer rates, in April, the State Department of Finance requested that we provide options to them that would generate more short-term savings, because that was now a higher priority than the long-term savings, and asked if we could do this before we finalized the valuation report. In May 2020, remember, the governor proposed budget revisions, and those revisions reflected the changes that we're going to talk about here today. The savings from the additional payments would now be realized over just 3 years instead of the 28 years. And those new rates for the current fiscal year that we're in right now need to be adopted by the board. So, and I'll come back to those additional payments in a second, but there's one other change that we're going to talk about here very quickly, and it's also related to the pandemic. The Highway Patrol plan is not one of the plans affected by the additional payment, but the employer rate for this plan is being revised. So what's happening here is that the Highway Patrol member contribution rate, it had been, we're talking about the member contribution rate, it had been scheduled to increase July 1, 2020. So that's something that had previously been agreed upon. Now, in June of this year, when the state reached agreements with bargaining units, including Bargaining Unit 5, the Highway Patrol bargaining unit, for salary reductions, they made other changes. So during the bargaining process, it was agreed upon to suspend the scheduled member rate increase for Bargaining Unit 5. And because the member rate is not going to be what we were projecting, we need to increase the employer rate. And so we'll take a look at those rates now. Next slide. Thank you. So the first column there, so these are the state plans. These are the 5 state plans. And the top 4, we're talking about moving the additional payment, and the bottom is the Highway Patrol. So the first column there is the numbers, the rates that were approved by the board in April. And remember, that had that additional payment amortized over many years. So first we had to remove that from the amortization schedule, which for those first 4 plans is going to actually increase the required contribution, the actual determined contribution. And in the third column, you see us applying those funds then to the current fiscal year. And we get a revised rate all the way on the far right, which is lower than it was in April. And for Highway Patrol, what's happening is that the employer rate is simply increasing to offset those lower than anticipated member contribution rates. There's no additional contribution there on the Highway Patrol line. And next slide. And then what happens, so there's the actuarial determined rate that we need to collect the normal cost and fund the unfunded liability, but the state also makes an additional contribution on top of that. So the state is always actually paying a little more than what we require. And the far column there is the rate that we need to tell the state agencies, this is what you need to contribute to CalPERS. Next slide. Okay, so then the other thing that happened was with the schools pool. Now, there's a slight difference here because we're not talking about an advance payment by the employer. In this case, the state made a payment towards the schools pool unfunded liabilities. The state is not the employer in this case, but a lot of the math works out the same. So this $904 million contribution that they gave us last July, part of it was to be applied toward the employer payment during that year and this current fiscal year, but most of it, $660 million, was paid towards one of the amortization bases, a very long amortization base, which was going to be, and what they did this time is through the legislation, actually changed the legislation of what to do with that $660 million. It's not being used to pay down the unfunded liability over a long period. It's being used to supplant, they say, the employer contribution for this year and next fiscal year. And that allows the school employers to capture all the savings from the additional contribution over a 3-year period when they need it the most. Next slide. And this is what the rates look like for schools. So in the first column, we have what was adopted in April. There's no change to the employer normal cost, the unfunded liability. And then, as you see, we already had a payment. We're already using part of the $904 million as an employer contribution in that year. And what's changed is that we've taken the $660 million out of the amortization schedule. That actually increases the unfunded liability rate by 0.25%, but there is much more being used to make up the employer contribution amount during this current fiscal year. So the net effect is that the employer contribution rate that we adopted in April is actually being reduced by 1.98%, and school employers this current fiscal year are going to be paying 20.70%. And with that, I will take any questions.
It does not appear I have any questions on this. So before we take a vote, I mean, I want to take a vote first, but we also have to go back and pull items from information consent when we're done with that. So if there are no questions, I need a motion on this item as it's an action item.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Miller and seconded by Mr. Jones. I need a roll call vote. All those in favor?
Henry Jones,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma. Frank,
Where'd he go? All right, go
I'm
ahead.
seeing a yellow triangle.
Yeah.
okay, David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Olivares,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubalcava.
Aye.
Madam Chair, I have all ayes with no vote from Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma, with David Miller making the motion and Henry seconding it.
Great, thank you. So the motion passes. That is agenda item 6A, revised state and schools employer-employee contribution. Thank you for the report, you guys. Have to move back to 5D. Ms. Brown, you wanted to pull 5D. Let's try to do that in order next time, okay?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me go back to 5D. I had a question for Mr. Cohen. And my question is, I'm looking at 5D is the annual consulting and service contract report for $100,000 or more. And it's come to my attention that some of our consultants are missing from that report, and I'm trying to figure out why or how you determine what goes on this report and what we don't get. Specifically, Makita. There's one Makita on here for real estate board investment consultant, but then we don't have the rest, because I know we've paid Makita probably more than this amount. Wilshire is missing, and then there was also a question about Randall Communications, and I understand that we heard that some of those costs were rolled into internal staff costs, and I'm trying to figure out why that's going on and what other consultants are not on this list, and I'd like to know why.
Sure. Let me have Dallas Stone, whose team prepares this report, give you an answer in terms of what goes on here and what doesn't. And then once he's done, let me follow up on Makita specifically. I know there were some questions about their circumstances as it relates to the annual CalPERS. So I will hit that after Dallas gives you a response in terms of kind of the rules of this report. So
right. Yeah, Dallas. Makita and Wilshire as well, right? So,
Sure, yes.
okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Can we also promote Justin Heeb as well?
Okay, Justin should be able to share his audio and video.
Great. Justin Heeb is our Assistant Division Chief over our contracts and procurement team, and I'll allow him to talk through how he and his team, how the reports were generated and the information was compiled.
Great, thanks, Dallas. Thank you for the question, Ms. Brown. So the report is pulled through multiple different groups, and so we pull all contracts over $100,000 and put that on the report. In regards to a Randall type of LOE, those are done through purchase orders, and so those would not be pulled out in the contract portion. They're represented in the purchase order portion of that report.
And is that purchase order portion of the report here?
The purchase orders are mentioned in the report. Hold on.
So I'm going to, someone who has an accounting and finance background, a purchase order is a contract. And if it's over $100,000, I believe the board should be seeing those as well. Because, you know, I try and match things up to the cost. And so I'd like to see those from now on. I don't know if the committee or the board is going to agree, but for transparency purposes, I'd like to see how much we're spending on all consultants, whether it's an individual contract or a purchase order, which is still a contract. It's in a contract for agreement for services or things. I don't want to see all the things we're buying, like a purchase order for paper, but I do want to see anytime we have a consultant that's providing services to the staff or to the board on this report.
Thank you for that. And we do just, in the purchase orders for this report, historically, we have just listed the purchase orders and the number on the attachment, but we have not called each individual purchase order for consulting out, but we can take that into consideration.
And not just over 100,000, right? So we're keeping
Correct.
the same criteria. All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is that your only question, Margaret?
No, now Mr. Cohen's going to answer about the other contracts that are not included on here. Thank you.
Okay.
Why, in terms of the CAFR, how the Wilshire and Makita contracts were treated. And those are sort of included in, as we had shared with the board, category called investment, personal and administrative costs. And so, you know, the consulting contracts for the board are considered administrative costs of the system, and that's why they're included in there. I know there was some confusion regarding Makita was listed in a separate area of the CAFR for $74,000. If I recall correctly, that's sort of an anomaly based on the fact that Makita merged with PCA during the fiscal year. So those contracts were actually with PCA, but by the time the CAFR was published, the official name of the business was Makita. Those were contracts for the diversity forum, as well as working on the responsible contractor policy. So that's why that $74,000 was treated separately than the base Makita contract that we think about, like Wilshire, as in terms of the board consultants, but those have been in the administrative expense line since 2015-16 within the CAFR, and certainly you'll see that again when we bring you, you know, the financial statements in at the November FAC meeting.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation. It's a little it's a little less than transparent when we have consultants that are shown as internal staff.
Well,
and maybe
let me correct you. They are not shown as internal staff. The category is internal staff and administrative expenses. So
right, but I don't think I don't believe consultants are administrative expenses under GIPS or under GASB. And so we can debate that, and maybe I'll have our auditors take a look at that. But I don't think that's an appropriate way to account for those expenditures. I'm going to ask you now publicly to break out those costs for me. I know you showed the 3 line items. They totaled about $14 million, but I want to know what fees or consultants are within that category, what we're paying. I'll ask for that detail.
Sure, I believe that was in the material we sent you, but I'm happy to provide any additional detail.
There was no detail. It just had the line item, like for board, for Invo, and for IT, but it didn't say how much and what the consultants were. It was rolled up. It was rolled up. And then I have another question on the same attachment, page 5 of 5, and this just comes from my little auditing background. It's kind of odd. We've got a FedEx corporate services. And it's odd that it's just $180,000. So is that FedEx contract just a flat rate contract for 100? Like, is it a flat rate, or it seems odd that we would send FedExes for exactly $180,000? So wondering if that's a flat rate contract, or if not, I'd like to see the detail on that as well.
Yeah, let me turn that one back to Dallas and his team. If they have the answer, otherwise we certainly.
Yeah, if not, you can just give it to me. You can just email it to me.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add on the FedEx contract. I believe that's what the total amount of the contract is for, not what the actual spend is, and we could get that exact dollar amount to you, Mrs. Brown, for that particular contract.
Yeah, because this is supposed to be spend, right? This is supposed to be spent, not contract amount. Is that correct?
Justin, do you want to hop in real quick?
Ms. Brown, the contracts that are pulled here are for encumbrance totals. So the total contract amount.
Oh, so it's total contract amount. It's not spent to date.
Correct.
That explains that one. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's move back to 6B, which was our asset liability management policy review.
Thanks, Chair. You'll recall at the July offsite, we sort of did a session where we walked through the calendar for the ALM this coming cycle, and 2021 calendar year is going to be a very busy year for all of us on ALM. One of the things I highlighted was that the entire process would have plenty of opportunities for stakeholder engagement. Given the environment we're in, we want to make sure that everyone knows what their opportunities are up to date on the process. So what we're going to do is have a quarterly webinar on ALM starting in 2021 so that everyone is very clear on their opportunities for stakeholder engagement and have a clear understanding of what's going on. That being said, this item in front of you for action is actually some technical cleanup to the policy that you were last adopted in 2017. So let me turn it over to Forrest Grimes to walk through the detail of that for you.
Thank you, Michael. Madam Chair, committee members, members of the board, Forrest Grimes, CalPERS team. Item 6B, as Michael mentioned, is an action item that includes the review of the asset liability management policy and proposed changes. The ALM policy was approved by the Board of Administration in April of 2017. The revised ALM policy adds the CEO, the Deputy Chief Investment Officer, to the Asset Liability Management Advisory Committee, which we lovingly refer to as ALMAC, and moves the General Counsel from ALMAC member to advisory member. I serve as the chair of ALMAC at the request of Mr. Cohen, our CFO. The revised ALM policy allows ALMAC members to assign additional representatives from the financial, actuarial, investment, legal, communications, and stakeholder relations offices to serve ALMAC in an advisory capacity. I will say that the revised ALM policy helps to achieve and maintain consistent ALM governance by providing clearly defined roles and processes. With that, I will ask that you move to approve the policy changes and certainly welcome any questions. But I do want to take a moment to thank Tim Skillman for doing a really great job of shepherding this through the process as our resident expert of the policy. Thank you. Back to you, Madam Chair.
I'm muted. Thank you very much. So it looks like I have a couple of questions. I have a question from Jason Perez first.
Good morning, Forrest. On attachment 2, page 1, why the change from capital B to a little b on board?
That's a wonderful question, and we actually debated that. That is the current style guide of CalPERS, and so we just corrected it to comply with CalPERS style guide.
So no change in authority or delegated authority or anything?
No, you're just as big of a part of the equation as you've always been, Mr. Perez.
Yay. And it's a silly question, but I really don't know. Why on page 2, why is stakeholder relations and the PR folks in general involved?
That really speaks to Mr. Cohen's point that we really want input from our stakeholder partners. And so they need to be an integral part of this process to make sure that the word gets out and that there's ample opportunities for our stakeholders to weigh in throughout the process.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And no change in the cycle or the still 4-year process, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Slick, thank you. That's all.
I do know that Ms. Taylor looks like she came back.
It looks like Henry's next if Teresa's not back.
Looks like, yeah, Henry's next. Teresa's off. Oh,
Okay, well,
Henry.
while Teresa's getting back on, I just have one question. Why was the general counsel removed?
I'm going to let Mr. Jacobs correct me if I'm wrong, but really the general counsel's role is to act as legal counsel, and therefore having them be an active member compromises that legal counsel role. But Matt, if you disagree, please weigh in.
I do not disagree. We're just an advisor on this stuff.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So with that, I guess if Teresa, you're back yet? Well, I would like to go ahead and Mr. Miller, I would like to go ahead and move approval of this item.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second.
I'll second. Okay. Who was that? It's Stacy. Okay, we've got so I'll ask Pam to call the roll.
Henry Jones.
Aye.
Frank Porcino for Fiona Ma.
Aye.
David Miller.
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris.
Aye.
Jason Perez.
Aye.
Ramon Rubalcaba.
Aye.
Mr. Vice Chair, I have Henry Jones making the motion, Stacy Oliveris seconded, and I have all ayes for item 6B.
Thank you, Pam. The motion passes. So that takes us to item 6C, proposed board election regulations. Dallas Stone.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dallas Stone, CalPERS team member. This agenda item is an action item seeking the board's final approval to adopt the proposed amendments to the board election regulations and approval to submit the final rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law. During the 2020 board election off year, CalPERS team members identify and submit regulatory changes to improve and clarify the election process for the next board election cycle. In addition, during the February Finance and Administration Committee meeting, the committee requested that regulatory provisions be modified to include an opportunity for candidates to voluntarily provide additional relevant information in their candidate statements. This additional information would pertain to financial solvency, sexual harassment, conflicts of interest, and protection of confidentiality. To address this request, the existing regulations were modified and presented to this committee back in April. The committee made a recommendation to the board to approve the initiation of the regulatory process. The board's approval initiated a 45-day public comment period during which CalPERS did not receive any public comments. If the proposed amendments are approved by the board, this rulemaking package will be submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for final review, approval, and will take effect January 1st, 2021. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at this time. Thank you.
So I'm going to assume that we all voted on the asset liability management already. And oh, good. For some odd reason, my chat completely cleared after I disconnected. So Stacy, it looks like, has a question right now.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering how our discussion of conflicts of interest and potentially how to prevent that will affect this.
Do we have a reply?
So, for example, question 8, do you have any conflicts of interest that could impact your role as a CalPERS board member? As we start talking about holding individual securities, and if we can, and if so, how to hold those, it seems like there's going to be additional detail.
Yes, Ms. Oliveris, if the board were to adopt that requirement for board members, then we would have to go through the rule writing process once again and pass a regulation or update this particular regulation.
Thank you, Ms. Frost.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, but I would like to bring up a issue. Oh, Henry. Well, you must have gotten a race with everything else. Henry, you go ahead.
Yeah, you missed me. My question was similar to Ms. Oliveris, and I first of all, I want to thank staff for putting all of those additional provisions in and recognizing that they are voluntary provisions because many of them we cannot mandate. But I support another review later. I wouldn't want to hold this report up, but to Ms. Oliveira's question about really about a blind trust for board members, I would like us to revisit that at a later time to see whether or not we could also include that going forward as a voluntary. I understand that we can't mandate it because of the constitutional requirements, but we'd like to maybe treat it like we're doing some of these items in a future discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I've noted that, and we can work with our legal team.
Okay. Stacy, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I read number 7 again, and I didn't read it this way before, but it says, have you ever been subject to any legal or employment action on the grounds of discrimination or sexual harassment? If yes, please explain. And so as I read this, I'm wondering if that could be misconstrued as somebody who was fired for their sexual orientation or race or ethnicity or gender. And if they would feel then that they had to, if they would then feel compelled that they had to disclose that. Because I don't think that's our intent.
That's correct. The grounds. No, it says on the grounds. Not. I'm thinking on the grounds means that you were accused of it, but
As I read it on the ground, have you ever been subject, take out legal for a second, so subject to employment action? So is it possible someone could have been fired because they were discriminated against? I just want to make sure, I guess from counsel, I'm understanding the reading of this correctly.
Right.
Yes, this is Matt Jacobs. I believe you are reading it correctly, and that the scenario you have posited would not be covered by this provision.
So what she's asking is, could it be misconstrued?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't think it's subject. I mean, you know, look, I'm a lawyer. Anything can be construed or misconstrued. But I mean, I don't think that's the most straight ahead reading of this thing. And since this is voluntary, if that was your reading of it and you thought it was unfair or wanted to explain that you thought it was required, but
well, no, I think that what she's saying is confusing. Is that it could sound like someone's been fired,
right,
as retaliation for reporting sexual harassment. You see what I'm saying? So that's where the
yeah, I understand. I just don't think that that's the most natural reading of that provision.
Okay. If Ms. Oliveris is satisfied, if you have better wording, you might want to send that to.
I don't. I'm an attorney. I just want to clarify that too, because I think the wording isn't the most clear. But you know, if that's my reading as a lay person, and other people would read this very clearly as an employment action against someone for discriminating against somebody else or harassing somebody else, that's different. So I think that's clarified.
Okay. Okay. So I also want to thank everybody for working on this and getting these these additions into our into the candidate information. But I also wanted to know if I could bring up something separate, and I see Jason has a comment. We are going to be holding elections next year. It is my thought, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels, that COVID's not going to be over by the time we're gathering signatures for next year's election. We've got 2 people up for election next year. Lacera and Lacers have already had problems gathering in-person signatures, and I know it's only 200 or 250 signatures that we have to have, but there was a suggestion they didn't have enough time to fix their, and it might be too short of a time for us as well, but to fix their rules or administrative laws or whatever. What would everybody think about not having to have wet signatures? Like if we could send it out to folks and get it signed and have it faxed back or scanned back. But there would have to be a change in the administrative rules. We may not have enough time, but I was wondering if we could explore that for possibly doing it with enough time. And that would also require the committee to vote whether or not they agree that that's even a problem. So that's just something I would bring up. Does anybody have any
Yeah, and Chair Taylor, we also have Mr. Stone available to talk about the emergency provisions of an emergency regulation adoption, if you would like him to do that at some point.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. And then it looks like I have Mr. Perez and Ms. Oliveras.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy and Ms. Taylor. I know that we've been working closely with the legal office and looking at what our options are if COVID created a challenge for us to get wet signatures. What we have learned is that upon our initial review or preliminary review, we do feel that we could do an emergency regulation, which takes anywhere between 15 and 20 days to get adoption. And we could work with the Office of Administrative Law on an emergency reg to allow us to adjust our current candidate petition procedures in order to receive some type of electronic signature, another way to collect signatures for the candidate petition package. The other option is that we could also go to the governor's office and ask them for guidance as well, because they do have the ability to suspend certain regulations in order to allow us to continue to conduct business. So again, we would obviously need to work with our legal team and look at the options and the timing and then move forward appropriately.
And it would be only for emergent situations like COVID, so it wouldn't be something that we would do on a normal basis, and we can make that clear whether that's with the governor's office or this emergency legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, what is the board's appetite for that? And I've got a comment from Jason and Stacy, so start with Jason. I think yours was on something else.
Yeah, mine was initially was going to be on Stacy's comments that it doesn't, on first reading of number 7, it doesn't scream at you, but if you read it and answer the question asked, yes, a victim of harassment could easily feel compelled to disclose that they've been subject of investigation. So I'm sure legal can come up with a better way to ask that question and still get the intended response. So that's on 7. In regards to
Can I just suggest something on that? Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Perez.
But
the Office of Administrative Law will review the regulations for clarity before they become finalized. And if the OAL believes that there's an issue here on the clarity, then they will ask us to fix it. I'm just a little bit reluctant to kind of slow the train that has been going for some time now to get to this point so that we can get the regulations in place for the next election cycle. Thank you.
That works for me. And then, Teresa, in response to your suggestion, I think that is a profoundly bad idea. I think we have to get wet signatures for a reason. Elections for us, for the CalPERS board's over a year away, and I'll stop there. You're off, Teresa. You're still off, Teresa.
We have to get wet signatures in March of 2021 to start the campaign. They're not a year off. So we will still be in COVID. I'm just letting you, I just think it's important. I'm a little confused as to why you think it's a bad idea, just real quick.
Certainly. It is rife. It is a breeding ground for dishonesty.
Okay, so, okay. I'm not quite clear. So you're saying
I can email my state union, and the state union can send out 80,000 ballots to get signed. And that, I don't think that's the intent of the law at all.
Okay. Next was Ms. Oliveira.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We discussed the electronic voting option before, sometime in early 2020 or late 2019. I don't remember. It's kind of a blur. I wanted to know if we could revisit that before deciding whether or not to move forward with an electronic voting option, because I think there was some issue about response rates and things like that. I would just like to look at that data again.
The electronic voting option is completely separate from this. This is, we are required to get 250 signatures to qualify for the ballot before voting even starts.
And that's what you're talking about, getting special, an exception. So for that, for the qualification for the ballot. Got it.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Next is Ramon Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I wanted to speak to the wet signature requirement. In your opening comments, Mr. Taylor, you mentioned Becerra and Lacers. That is my county and hometown, and so I was pretty aware of that. And I think getting wet signatures in this period will help people, especially be comfortable participating. We don't want to disenfranchise anybody. And it's a small number, relatively small compared to the voters. So I'm sure there's a procedure that can be implemented to verify that these are authentic signatures. So I know another process is electronic signatures is acceptable through an app and all that. So I would think it's part of one.
Well, they're not electronic signatures. They would.
Well, that's true. That's true. But still, it's. I guess what I'm trying to say is we're in uncertain situations and we need to make adjustments. And I would be in favor of facilitating getting an alternative to wet signatures some other way through fax or something. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not really hearing much of an appetite for it, though. I think you and me, Ramon, are pretty much it. Stacy, go ahead. Oh, you're still muted.
Technical difficulty. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm still trying to understand the issue because I don't have a lot of information about that, and this is not my area of expertise. Right now, are these signatures only collected in hard copy and then mailed?
Well, no, we collect them personally. We used to. So sometimes they're mailed. Like if I can't always be in Los Angeles. I have state workers all over the state, right? So I can't get to Los Angeles and San Diego. So I might send the petitions to people I know, and then they have to be mailed to me. But in my own work sites up here in Sacramento, I would collect them. I would go to a work site and collect signatures is what I would do.
Yes, Ms. Oliveris, a candidate who wants to run for a position on the board has a requirement to collect 250 wet signatures today. And once those signatures are collected, they get turned into our elections coordinator who operates under Mr. Stone. And they will go through and validate in our system that those are legitimate, those 250 signatures are legitimate, i.e. they're members of the system.
Thank you, Ms. Frost. And how does that, by turning in, what do you mean by that? Can that be by mail or is that in person?
I think some candidates have done it in person and some candidates have mailed it in, just depending on what part of the state they're from. But most of the candidates, at least that I'm aware of, have turned it in directly into CalPERS, hand delivered those.
And what's our verification process?
Mr. Stone, would you like to go through that?
Yes. So once the signatures are submitted to our board elections coordinator, the board elections coordinator, we do ask for other identifiable information on the nomination petition package. And then we will go into our CalPERS system and we will validate that, in fact, that the member that did sign the nomination petition package is an eligible member and voter within the election. And then once we have the 250 validated signatures, then we move forward with the nomination petition process and then eventually the election.
Do we verify that they are in fact nominating that candidate? So for example, do we send out an email to those 250 asking for verification that they are in fact nominating this candidate?
So on the main page of each nomination petition package, it is which candidate that they are supporting on the main page, and then they submit the 250 plus signatures. Therefore, and like what Ms. Frost mentioned, that the candidate usually submits them in person with their signatures and the other information that we request from that nomination petition package to our board elections coordinator.
Right. So we don't verify that they're actually nominating that candidate because we have this process by which the candidate then turns it in. But if we're looking at a substitute process or an alternative process, perhaps we might need to add a feature by which we are verifying that those nominations are really for that candidate.
I think I think what Mr. Stone was, and perhaps it would be nice to, when we put this back on the agenda item, I know there's a couple questions coming, is that we actually show you some of these forms, but the form that a person who is saying, yes, I will sign for this nominee, they see at the top of that page which nominee they're signing for. So it's within the documentation itself that I'm signing for this particular candidate. But I'll pause there because I know we've got a few board members who have just recently gone through this process who may like to add a little more detail.
Thank you.
Henry.
That's
there you go.
Having just gone through the process a year ago, yeah, it's correct that my name appeared at the top of every page that includes 20 lines for people to sign. And they also have to list their last 4 digits of their social security number. So they're verified that that person is qualified as a retiree to vote. And by the way, I have left that form with other people who have gathered signatures, and sometimes they are mailed directly into the election coordinator's office. However, the majority of them I personally took in to the election coordinator, but there are some forms that are mailed in with those signatures on that same document, but the candidate name has to be on every one. Matter of fact, your signature has to be on all of those. And then that person signs and put their last 4 digits of the social security number. And if they don't match, then they're not counted towards being eligible for that 250 member threshold. So if someone could leave a form and have it mailed in by someone else, then I don't see the problem of not being able to accept mail-in documents, because we do mail them in now. So that would be my viewpoint.
Okay, Frank.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been having technical difficulty. I think we all have. So I'm not sure. A couple of times I was out, but I think COVID has changed and everything. And I think it will be prudent to be prepared to make to come up with an alternate method or another method to collect the signature and the verification. So I think we should be exploring that possibilities. After all, we are now allowing voting by mail, by email. We allowing we allowing for signature to be accepted during an immediate signature. So I don't see I see us to do the responsible thing to do is to explore all those possibilities, because it could be a real issue. We could probably will be an issue. We could probably not go to a work site to collect signature because, for example, right now all the in-person meetings of all organizations have been suspended. So you would not have that opportunity. Anyhow, I believe it will be prudent for us to explain that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Jones that since I'm based in Southern California, signatures can be gathered by mail. And I don't think it's a problem. I don't think we should change the process. It's only 250 signatures. And just like most of us are voting by mail, I think we trust our post office to deliver the items. And I don't have an issue with them just keeping it the same. Also, I believe that our agencies are going to start opening up as we keep getting the numbers down in California, I believe the state offices will start opening up and school districts will open up. And, this is, it's a little different than, say, Mr. Jones when he had to get retirees. We have an opportunity with this next election for all members, retired and active. So it's going to be much easier because there's 1.9 million members. I don't know how many of them are active and voting, but it's going to be much easier to get them. And I really don't want to see us monkey with the regulations. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, my mute does not want to come off. Henry, did I misunderstand you that you were stating that you thought it was a good idea to have fax signatures, or did not like that idea?
No, I was saying I think it is a good idea with the COVID-19. I think we have to modify our practice.
Okay. And then in addition, I think all you were saying about mailing, other people were mailing in signatures for you. I always had them send them to me and then I took them in personally.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in any event, they're going to be checked with their social security number. So you're not going to be able to overcount because, so it's going to be verified. So you're only going to be able to count those members that are actual members.
Okay, great. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Ms. Middleton?
Thank you. I've got a question about the form and how it is used. Is it possible for one name to be on a form and submit it, or is it a list of 30, 40 names that has to be on a single form?
I think it's 20 names to a form.
And you have to provide 20 names on each form?
Not necessarily, no. I don't believe that.
If there was only one name on the form, Ms. Middleton, we would accept it. If someone, filled out 20 names or 15 names or 9 names, and we get it again, like Mr. Jones and others have mentioned, they've allowed other people to take signatures and then mail them to them. So in whatever fashion they do come in, we'll take it in and validate that they are eligible.
Okay, and Dallas, thank you for that. So you could get the 250 signatures, 250 separate forms, and you would accept that?
Absolutely.
Okay, and is there a limit on how many signatures someone can collect in order to collect 250 valid signatures?
No, there is no limit, and in a lot of occasions, candidates will collect more than 250 signatures just to be on the safe side, because some people might be confused that they're in PERS or not within PERS, or eligible to vote or not eligible to vote. So most candidates usually take well over the 250 just to as a precaution.
If I could comment, as someone who has collected signatures and ran in local city and county, these rules are far more generous to signature gathering than what you will find in most counties, where you're going to have to submit a list of signatures on a defined number of documents that's significantly less than the total number of signatures that you need. And there are limits generally on how many signatures you can collect in an effort to get to a valid number of signatures. So I think we're being very fair with the process, and this even in COVID, we can mail documents to supporters, and I don't see the need to change from wet to electronic. And I don't have a vote on this committee, but I'll offer that.
Okay. Margaret, did you have another question? Or is that just you telling?
No, it's an old one. It was an old one.
Okay. And Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I think it's important that we're not talking about Are we talking about electronic signature? Or are we talking about sending out faxes for people to sign and fax back? That's not an electronic signature.
Right, exactly. So it's
all we're doing is saying we're facilitating gathering of the signature, the paper document, by being able to accept faxes, et cetera.
So let me get an idea here. I mean, Ms. Frost, I don't know if we explore this, we don't have a whole lot of time. So would we have Dallas come back with information and then we could vote on it? It sounds like I got an even number for and an even number against. I can't tell for sure.
Yeah.
Can I make a?
Go ahead.
I'm happy to chime in on this. So we're a little bit jammed for time. And what I would suggest is that if we wanted to pursue this, we don't have any other problems or issues with what is before you, that we send these regulations on to the OAL so we can get them in place in time. And then we take up this issue the next time. So we could do a subsequent regulation on it, an amendment. The problem with changing the language now,
Matt, we didn't intend that. I do want to go through and pass C1 for sure. This would be an emergency legislation.
Right. So Chair Taylor.
Okay.
Yeah. So Chair Taylor, my response to your question would be, either based on committee direction out of this committee or a motion, however you choose to do that. You could ask management to come back with an option. We could schedule that meeting in November and come back for an option for you to vote on, and whether that was an emergency regulation process or through the powers of Governor Newsom, depending on the outcome of that particular vote in November. But we could do that based on your direction, the committee's direction.
So can we do that then? Let's just, we can always vote on it later if everybody disagrees, or if enough people disagree, then it won't pass. But if we could move that along for November, that would be awesome. Just to explore another option in case, flu season's coming up. I get it. It would be great if everything goes away, but we just don't know.
Okay.
2020 hasn't been the best of years for us.
Okay. Mr. Cohen, we'll put that down as committee direction.
Thank you so much. And then if there are no more questions, Jason had a motion. Did you want to make a motion on that, Jason?
Yeah, I motion that we save everyone some time and effort and just keep everything the way it is now.
I already gave committee direction, so and we'll do it for November. It's not going to happen here, so we need to see it first.
Pretty sure it has to go for a second and then, or not a second, and then it dies.
Okay, is there a second for his motion? Okay, no second. Thank you very much. So Stacy, it looks like you had one more question.
One more question, and sorry about this. Just to follow up on Mr. Jacobs' comment, I've had to do emergency regs through OAL before, and as he indicated, there are often a lot of changes, and it takes quite a long time. So I imagine by the time we get to our November meeting, we will have some type of update with new text from the OAL that we can look at.
I think we're talking about two different things. I think what we're doing here on C is different. We're sending that through and we need to get it done. And we will vote on that momentarily. What I was suggesting was emergency OAL regs just for this specific issue of what signatures, and or, as Ms. Frost said, something from the governor's office.
Okay, so, and that's where I'm getting a little bit confused here, because this wasn't a specific agenda item. So you're saying your direction will be that CalPERS team is going to take a look at that?
Yeah, so it has nothing to do, I just brought it up under C because it is part of the election.
Right.
That's why I brought it up, but it is separate from C.
Right, okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense, got it, thank you.
Okay, so I need a motion to pass.
I'll move 6C.
Thank you. I need a second. Anybody? Okay, Mr. Rubalcava. So I have a
Yes.
motion to move 6C, seconded by Mr. Rubalcava. All those in favor, Ms. Hopper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Henry Jones.
Henry, unmute.
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma.
Aye.
David Miller.
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris.
Aye.
Jason Perez.
Aye.
Ramon Rubalcava.
Aye.
Madam Chair, I have all ayes. David Miller making the motion. Ramon Rubalcava seconding it for item 6C.
Okay, the item passes. Let's move on to 7A. Annual actuarial valuation terminated agency pool. Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, that concludes our action items. I'll turn this one over to the actuaries to walk you through this annual report.
Yes, good afternoon. Julian Robinson, Actuarial Office. I'm happy to present the results of the terminated agency pool this afternoon. This was the valuation which we performed as of June 30, 2019. If you can move to the next slide, please. In the valuation, we had 109 plans in the TAP, or 5 additions to the TAP in this most recent valuation. The funded status of the pool is 202.8%. Next slide, please. These are a list of the 5 agencies which joined since the last valuation, which was conducted June 30, 2018. There was an addition of about $1 million in liabilities associated with these agencies which joined the pool. Next slide, please. Every year, the discount rate for the terminated agency pool changes. The reason for this is, according to the board policy, we use the government bond rate for the strips to determine what the discount rate is. This matches the investment strategy that's used by the terminated agency pool. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So here are the numbers in front of you. There's, as you can see, the funded ratio of the TAP, terminated agency pool, as of June 30, 2019 is 202.8%. In rough numbers, there's $300 million in assets and $150 million in liabilities. So relative to the size of the whole PERF, this is really a very small plan. It's less than 0.1% of the whole PERF, but it is a significant pool which everybody is focusing on, and it's important to present to the board and update the funded status. Next slide, please. So the investments in the pool are divided into 2 sections. There's a section called the immunized segment and a section called the surplus segment. The intention of the immunized segment is to buy a portfolio of bonds, and the investment office carries this out every year, to match the cash flows of the benefit payments which come out of the TAP. So every year, the investment office goes through a rebalancing of the immunized segment as the demographics of the TAP change, so do the projected cash flows. So the actuarial office provides the investment office with a 50, 60-year projection of what we expect future benefit payments to do, and the investment office produces an immunized portfolio of bonds to match as closely as possible. Any surplus amounts available are invested with PERF and the rest of the funds in the system. And as you can see, it's approximately 50-50 breakdown between what's in the immunized segment and what's in the surplus segment. The rate of return that was achieved in the last fiscal year was 7.2% as of June 30, 2019. The reason why there was such a high rate of return was that as bond rates decreased, that increases the value of bonds, and that's why the performance of the TAP was very significant. Next slide, please. This, we have a requirement to test the sensitivity of our results based on different impacts of changes in mortality. So this slide shows that if under the current mortality, our TAP has a 202.8% funded ratio. If mortality rates decreased, it would drop down to 195.9%. And similarly, if mortality rates increased, it would increase to 209.3%. Next slide, please. And we do a similar sensitivity impact calculation on the possible changes in inflation. So the inflation rate, which was used in this valuation, was 1.85%. In the event that inflation is lower, then the funded ratio would be expected to increase up to 230.9%. If the opposite were true, if inflation was 1% higher, then the funded ratio would drop to 194.4%. This is a general overview of all the relevant information from the TAP. If you have any further questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Julian. It looks like I don't have any questions on this. So we can move on.
Great, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Chair, the next item is also an informational one. Based on the committee's direction, we revised this report a little bit, but I'll turn it over to Arnita Page to walk you through sort of our annual report.
Good afternoon, Arnita Page, CalPERS team. Information item 7B provides our annual program update, which includes the status of contract terminations and collections activity. The format of the full report provided as attachment 2 was professed in response to feedback from the committee in February 2020. Next slide, please. A summary of program highlights for the fiscal year 2019-20 include resolution of 502 delinquent cases to maintain a below 2% delinquency rate to meet a strategic measure. Coordination of 9 contract closeouts to assist defunct employers and support benefit protection. And providing 30 agencies who became delinquent on their pension obligations with short-term payment arrangements ranging up to 4 months to assist with temporary financial challenges. Next slide, please. This slide shows improvements made to enhance service delivery. We focused on employer education and incorporated financial analysis within the review process for new contracting agencies. Streamlined the pension contract amendment and termination processes to enhance document management functionality in the CalPERS system, and developed employer FAQs for cost sharing and golden handshake optional benefits to address most frequently answered questions. Next slide, please. 9 agencies submitted a final resolution to terminate their contract with CalPERS during the fiscal year, and there are currently no agencies pending termination. Next slide, please. Our collection report showed we had 17 active cases with amounts outstanding of $393,488 at the fiscal year end of 2019-20. On August 26th, we've collected nearly 72% of the balance owed, and we believe the remaining cases are solvable. Next slide, please. This final slide shows the 3 agencies currently on a payment plan. The first two agencies are paying off their termination unfunded liabilities, and the last agency is paying off their unfunded accrued liability cost. This concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Anita, it doesn't look like you have any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. And I guess we can move on to item C, 7C, board
Sure.
21 budget.
Let me just give you a little bit of framing, and then I'll turn it over back to you for discussion. So you'll recall in July of this year at the offsite, I kind of walked you through the steps we're taking in lowering the CalPERS budget. You'll see that proposal in November for action. This is a discussion item, and whatever sort of comes out of the discussion, we'll integrate into that proposal for November, and you'll have a chance to vote on it then. But basically, the key here is that the board expressed interest in taking a look at its own budget that you adopted in April to determine whether or not you wanted to revise it. Obviously, some revisions will happen on the natural. For instance, the PLPs on state employees, those savings will be integrated already. And then obviously the board members as well aren't doing as much, if any, travel right now. And so those savings will accrue naturally. But with that, Chair, let me turn it back to you for discussion.
Certainly, thank you very much. Mr. Jones, I know that you had some specific information on this as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You may recall, as Mr. Coyne indicated when this discussion came up, we asked board members whether or not they had any ideas about making changes to the overall budget. And I think I received one request, but subsequent to that, looking at the fact that our board services unit staff will be reducing their compensation similar to all other state employees, and also recognizing that we don't know what the new normal is. We know we're saving money because we're not traveling to board meetings, we're not traveling to conferences. So my suggestion is that we don't try to make additional reductions at this time, and we wait till we know how we are going to operate in the new upcoming fiscal year. And then we could talk about some policies based on a new normal, whether it's a reduction in travel costs or whatever the case may be. But I think at this stage, the staff has already been taking a reduction, just as all other staff, in terms of compensation. So I think that that would be my suggestion at this time.
That sounds like a good suggestion. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that? Because as it is, I agree with Mr. Jones. We currently aren't traveling. We aren't eating at the board. We're not traveling to board meetings. We're not traveling for board business. So and all of our board services unit took the same 10% pay cut that these state workers took. So unless anybody has, okay, hold on, Jason. And I think Henry's suggestion is well-founded to revisit this at the next fiscal year as we see where COVID takes us. But let me go ahead. Mr. Perez, go ahead.
I'm just curious, we have an update as for replacement for Ms. Perkins.
I don't have that information. Henry, go ahead.
Yeah, I've talked to Ms. Frost about that and asked for a process to be established for that, Mr. Jason. Perez, rather.
No, Jason's fine. Okay. What? Can we just promote inside?
I mean, of course, they're eligible too, if that, turns out to be the case, yeah.
Doesn't mean we won't backfill. That all depends on what's needed.
Okay, thank you.
the next fiscal year. And we can move on from here. Mr. Cohen, we're on long-term care evaluation. You're muted, Michael.
Sorry about that. I think Don Molds has queued this up fairly well based on your prior discussions in the investment committee as well as pension and health. The actuaries are going to walk you through their presentation here. So why don't I turn it over to Scott and Fritzy.
There we go. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Scott Trano with the Actuarial Office. Just as a quick reminder before we start, this is an information item, and we're not seeking any action on this item today. I think as Don previewed earlier, both yesterday and today, this item is going to go over the long-term care results evaluation this year. And there are some significant changes in the actuarial assumptions being determined this year. When you look at some of the main drivers, we're looking at changes in the morbidity rate, the lapse rate, and primarily the discount rate. These updates will have significant impact on the liabilities and possible premium increases depending upon all the other items that are in flux right now that Don has previously talked about. Joining me today, Fritzy Archuleta will walk us through the valuation results and discuss our analysis. We also have available today with us our long-term care actuary, Flora Hugh, and an outside consultant, Clark Heitkamp, who will be available for questions if we need those answered. And with that, I'll pass along to Fritzy.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Fritzy Archuleta, CalPERS team. I'm here today to present the long-term care evaluation results as of June 30th, 2019. Next slide, please. Some background information. Each year, an experience study is done on the long-term care program to ensure adequate funding for the program. We also incorporate experience during the year that the evaluation is done. This year, the Actuarial Office recommends revisions to 3 different assumptions. First, the discount rate is recommending going from 5.25% to 4%. Recall that the discount rate is the rate at which the liabilities for the program is discounted to the present day. It is also our best estimate of what the portfolio, as it stands today, can be expected to earn in the future. We have also made recommended changes to the morbidity rates. The morbidity rates shape the future claims costs for the program. And finally, there are recommended changes to the lapse rates, which are the rates at which policyholders are expected to lapse their policies with CalPERS. Next slide, please. Because the discount rate has a significant impact on the liabilities of the plan, we will take the next few slides to discuss our development of it. The long-term care fund undergoes an ALM process every 4 years. There is also a mid-year cycle review. ACTO has found that the picture has actually changed dramatically over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. As of June 30th, 2017, this was the CMA picture. Please pay special attention to the fixed income lines on this slide. Next slide, please. 2.5 years later, you can see that the outlook is much lower than it was in 2017. Next slide. 2 key points that went into our analysis. The current portfolio is made up of 66% fixed income. As you recall from the last 2 slides, the outlook for fixed income is much lower than it was 2 years ago. The program is also a closed program, in which the average policyholder age is 75 years old. This means that we anticipate 65% of the funding is needed over the next 20 years. To add extra pressure to the program is experiencing a negative cash flow situation where more money is leaving from the plan than what is coming in. We expect this negative cash flow to peak in 2039. For these reasons, ACTO is recommending a 4% discount rate. Next slide, please. Incorporating the new assumptions and the experience during the 2018-19 fiscal year, slide 7 displays the state of the long-term care program today. You can see that the margin, which is an indicator of whether or not premiums need to be increased, is at a negative 85%. And the funded status, which discloses the overall health of the plan, is at a 69%. Next slide, please. This is a reconciliation of the margin from the last year to this year. The rows in purple reflect the actual experience of the program during the 18-19 fiscal year. The rest of the rows reflect the long-term changes made to the expected future costs of the program. As the program stands today, we do not anticipate that the program has enough money to pay all anticipated benefits. Some actions must be taken to correct this. Items were discussed with you at the Investment Committee meeting, as well as the Pension, Health, and Benefits Committee meeting. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you at the November board meeting. This concludes my presentation. I will now open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Fritzy. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing any right now. Just want to give everybody a chance. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions. So we'll move on to, thank you very much for all the reports, you guys. I really appreciate all your hard work. And I'm going to move on to summary of committee direction.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I've got two things. First is we agreed to provide some additional detail on actual expenditures regarding the information we've already sent to the board, as well as FedEx. So we will get you that shortly. And then second, we will agendize a November item to have further discussion on the elections issue regarding wet signatures and so forth. So those are the two things that I have.
And I don't have anything in addition to that. I do appreciate that. And finally, we're on public comment, and I don't know if we have any. Mr. Fox, Sharif, anybody?
I don't think we have any public comment for today.
Okay, no public comment. So I'm going to adjourn the Finance Administration Committee meeting.
Ms.
Yeah.
Taylor, I just want to announce that we will convene the Board Governance Committee meeting at 1:45.
1:45 it is. That's what I was going to ask. All right. See you guys at 1:45. Thank you.